Governor Josh Green just returned from California, where he attended the Milken Institute Global Conference, where he collaborated with other leaders on topics affecting our community right now. Among them, health, climate change, resilience, and forging a path forward. And Governor Green joins us live now to share some of the key takeaways. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
When doing some research on the Milken Conference, we learned climate change is emerging as the greatest health challenge of the 21st century. Can you tell us why and how do we fight back on that?
Sure. I was on one panel with leaders from across the globe. For instance, one guy's in Kenya, and global warming has caused incredible catastrophes there, where sometimes they get global warming in one part and then they get flooding in another because things have changed, and then a dam breaks, killing thousands of people. We, of course, had our climate tragedy on Maui just a little over 9 months ago with extremely dry weather, strong storms, and then the fire. So this is what we talked about, and the idea is to put in resources in advance so you can do prevention. Kind of the model as a doctor that I like to look at, put in prevention now so that we don't have tragedy later. And that's what we talked about. It was an incredible thing to see President Clinton and other leaders from around the globe.
And of course, as you just mentioned, the state has seen its fair share of inclement weather recently. Of course, the Maui wildfires last August. Hurricane season is coming up. We do know we have federal dollars coming our way for long-term infrastructure improvements, but as you mentioned, we got to start doing things now. So what are we trying to do now to try and shore up our infrastructure?
Sure. So right now we're going into hurricane season and fire season, right? So what we have to do is do what we've been talking about for the last couple months. The legislature appropriated a lot of resource, which is great, to help us get ahead of things. We're doing fire breaks. We're putting in new technology, super weather stations peppered all across the high-risk areas like, of course, West Maui, but also West Oahu and Waikoloa, all these places, plus sensors, so that if we see a fire miles away, they get an early indication and they can go in with all kinds of resources. We're also going to fund a statewide fire marshal that can constantly go after big dollars. So lots of things are going on, but people should still know that they are going to be the front line too. This is an all-community effort, and that's why this is Fire Awareness Month.
I know experts are predicting we're going to be seeing some of the same conditions this year as we saw last year, which I know people hearing that might make them a little worried. So we've also talked to quite a few communities right now, that fire-wise communities, and as you mentioned, people just having to be alert, and we also are putting some of these safeguards in place. So what are some things people can be doing themselves?
Well, everyone should have a bag, an escape bag if they have to, where they have an extra form of ID, a few dollars, and some clothing just in case, God forbid, there's another big fire. Also, we've revamped our siren protocols, so we will use sirens much more often if we have any concerns, not just about tsunamis like we used to, but also fires. So be aware for that. And God willing, we won't have any of these kind of tragedies. But that's what you want to do. For hurricanes, you have 2 weeks of supplies at home, extra water especially, and food supplies. For fire, if you had to evacuate, you have that emergency bag with a couple days of clothing and the ID. But also be very aware of your surroundings. Know when we have these red flag warnings, which means it's high risk for fire conditions. That usually comes as we get into the summer, and we'll be really sharing all the information with you guys at the news because we want everyone to be aware.
And I know you mentioned a fire marshal. That, of course, was a big topic during the legislative session this year, because we're, I think, the only state without a fire marshal in place. Let's talk about the legislative session. That, of course, has finished up. A lot of stuff going into wildfire mitigation. What are your thoughts on the end of the legislative session? And now, all of those things are on your desk.
Well, they did a good job, especially on fire recovery. They put over $1 billion for the long haul into reconstruction for Maui, which we have to do to get people back into housing and help people heal. But also, these are the many things that we asked for, like the fire marshal, like the fire breaks, like some monies for environmental protection so we can put in native species so that they absorb more water in the land and so it's less fire risk. So the Ledge did a very good job funding those initiatives. The one part that we haven't yet succeeded on is having something that goes forward thinking. In other words, some kind of climate impact fund or fee or an approach to insurance so that if, God forbid, there's ever another disaster or catastrophe, we're prepared and we have resources. That's going to be very important. I will come back to that year over year till we get it.
And I know end of legislative session, you just signed a bill giving, or in terms of the counties, giving them a better option to regulate short-term housing. That was another big thing this session.
Yes.
Is why leave it up to the counties instead of doing an sweeping rule for the entire state?
So there had been a lawsuit or two that blocked the counties from actually regulating locally. That affected both Maui and Oahu pretty significantly. Mayor Blangiardi wanted to go to 90 days, where the short-term rentals had to be at least 90 days, which essentially puts them into the long-term housing category because not many people are going to do a short-term rental for 90 days. Got shut down by the courts, back to 30 days. So this gives him the power to go back and fix that. And then on Maui, there's this thing called the Minatoia Group, which is a judge a long time ago gave exemptions to tons and tons of short-term rentals on Maui. And just by changing that, and so the mayor and the council are really being proactive with the new bill, they can bring 7,000 plus short-term rentals back into housing for Maui families. Now remember, 3,071 families, 3,071 were displaced by the fire. So bringing 7,000 plus units back into the inventory, plus the short-term housing that we're building, the transitional housing, which is over 1,000 units, plus just regular building, we can finally get ahead of this challenge. So it takes an approach on all these fronts. Also, you're going to see homeless numbers that are kind of staying the same, maybe even edging up a little bit. That's because people can't afford housing. We're constantly in a kind of a run on the treadmill where people are suffering economically. They end up living in their trucks or cars or leaving for the mainland. We've seen all these phenomena. So the big picture is fix short-term housing problems, fix the short-term rental. You're going to see me sign a massive tax reduction or tax break for ALICE families that are really living on the edge. I'll sign that in a couple weeks. That's over $5 billion over the next 7 years. And then you're going to see people's wages go up. And then finally, if we can get a lot of housing put back into the market, the prices will come down. But it takes time. And I'm so grateful that people are starting to see that the long-term work will pay dividends over time.